Happy Valentine's! I didn't get you anything, sorry. Greetings, my creepy little love hearts, and welcome to Monster Gab, where we love to talk about classic and vintage horror. And today we're going to be talking about My Bloody Valentine from 1981.
My Bloody Valentine!
So this is a typical 80s slasher-style horror film, only this one is Canadian. Not sure if that's relevant. I've said it now. It stars Paul Kellman, Laurie Harrier, and Neil Affleck. Now, I mentioned briefly in a previous video that I went to see the remake of this film in the cinema. Now, it's only my opinion, but I didn't particularly like that film. It's only my opinion. If you guys disagree, that's great. If you like it, good for you. It didn't do much for me, I'm afraid. That being said, when I learnt it was indeed a remake, it made me wonder if the original film was any good. I mean, there had to be something about it for them to want to remake it, right? Well, there's certainly something about it, I'll say that much. So here is the synopsis then. A mining town experiences a disaster when 5 miners are killed within the mine. It just so happens to be Valentine's Day, but Harry Warden, a survivor of the disaster, is traumatized by the events, and he threatens anyone who disrespectfully attends the Valentine's dance. He keeps to his word, and anyone who attended the dance met with a fateful end. 20 years later, the townsfolk, who are fearful of the events that happened all those years ago, make the decision to reintroduce the Valentine's dance. This is a mistake on their part, as Harry Warden is back in town. Sending his usual threats, anyone who is to attend this Valentine's dance will indeed meet a fateful end as before. What a big baby. Okay, so let's talk about this movie then. I don't think this film got the recognition that it originally thought it would have. It certainly is piggybacking off all the kind of typical slasher films that were around at the time. What I will say is it got released in 1981, very close to the time where John Lennon was sadly killed. Due to this actual tragic event, a lot of films that were considered violent were really kind of hit hard, and there was a lot of backlash. A lot of cuts were made. My Bloody Valentine was no exception. It had to make a lot of cuts, apparently. Now, there is an extended version available, but we're going to review the version that came out in the day. And in my honest opinion, despite the cuts, it still holds up pretty well. Let's talk about the main villain of the movie then, Harry Warden. It's not a particularly scary name, is it? But that's his name. He's the villain. He's kind of a Michael Myers meets Darth Vader in a weird way. From the Michael Myers aspect, he's in workers' overalls, his face is covered, he never speaks, he's always on a murderous rampage, he has a pickaxe instead of a kitchen knife, but he's kind of Michael Myers-esque, and the movie does kind of take inspiration from Halloween, I do believe. And as far as the Darth Vader side comes into it, well, just the fact that he's a bad guy, he wears a mask and he does a lot of heavy breathing, I suppose. But Harry Warden, I'm afraid, is less intimidating. Or at least he is to me, that's just my opinion. Right, the acting in this film is, well, it's quite good actually. There's nothing wrong with the acting, but it is a little bit goofy. But then I feel like there's a lot of characters in this film, and they are fairly interesting, and I feel like they're trying to create a lot of camaraderie with the characters. I mean, most of them are all minors anyway, they all know each other. And at the very beginning of the film, there's this kind of like subtle humour. It's not funny, and by no means is it a comedy, but there is this kind of humour that's going on at the beginning of the film. This is where we see the characters all showering together and having a bit of a joke and a laugh, and then they comically race to their vehicles, and as they're doing this, there's this kind of bluegrass soundtrack playing in the background, and they're all just driving off erratically. There's loads of backfire from some of the cars, and at this point of the film I honestly thought, is this a comedy? Am I watching a funny film here? It's by no means a comedy, and nothing in this scene will make you laugh, but it's, I don't know, it's just there's nothing serious happens at this point of the film. It's a very weird entrance to the movie. Not long after this scene, we see all the miners in the town hall setting it up for the Valentine's dance. Now, this scene really does paint a picture of how Valentine's Day can be seen from different perspectives. For instance, almost everyone in this film is in some kind of relationship, and it's in this scene that you see them all kissing each other, talking to each other, and being very affectionate, apart from one character, TJ, who's just kind of leaning against a door frame. Now, this is a scene that really does kind of smack you in the face, because Valentine's Day can be quite a lonely day for some people, especially those that don't have a loved one, and this scene is just kind of a reminder of that, really. I don't know if it was intended, but it certainly does feel that way for me. Who has a Valentine's dance anyway? I don't know, maybe we don't in this country, but do other nations like celebrate Valentine's Day in such a way that they have a dance? Do they set up the town hall with hearts and stuff? Maybe you do. Let me know in the comment section if you do. I'd be very interested, actually. We don't over here. We just don't care. So going back to the earlier part of the film where I said the scene felt like there was a bit of humour in it, throughout this film there is actually some humour, and again, it's not a comedy, but like all horror films, there's always some kind of subtle humour just to kind of draw you away from the horror aspect. The problem is, this film's not really scary enough to be drawn away from, but the humour still works. The only issue I do have with the humour is they have this kind of fall guy called Howard, and he's kind of the comic relief, but for me, I don't find him particularly funny. I just find him very childish and immature, which is ironic because I'm childish and immature, but it just doesn't work for me in this film. This film also has the generic wise man with the tales of warning. In this case, he's an angry barman, but he warns them of the dread that happened 20 years ago, and if they carry on with their actions, it will happen again, only for the rest of the town to just laugh at him and tell him to be quiet, and oh, it'll all be all right, and stop ruining our good times. Like I said before, this film's not particularly original, and it certainly does take inspiration from other films. What the film does try to do is keep you guessing though. I mean, is Harry Warden actually back in town, or is it someone else? And if it is someone else, then who? It's one of those films where you're going to make your own prediction. I made my own prediction and I guessed it right, and I'm pretty sure that most of you who've watched the film probably did the same, but it doesn't give you the answer until the very end. I don't want to keep referring to this film as a copycat film, but there are some scenes in this film that are quite reminiscent. Like there's a POV shot scene, you know, first person perspective, that is quite reminiscent of the first Halloween film, you know, the very beginning when Michael Myers is a child. And then there's a scene later that's a little bit reminiscent of a scene that's in Halloween 2. The effects in this film are a bit of a mixed bag also. Well, I suppose that's not really fair to say that. There's one particular scene where we see a heart in a candy box, and when you first see it, to me it looked a little bit cheap, but maybe it's just not particularly aged well. The rest of the effects in this film are actually pretty good. There's lots of blood, lots of gore, despite the fact that this is the cut version as well, and there's plenty of decent death scenes as well. There's kind of an odd backstory to this movie as well, which is not really entirely necessary, except for the fact that if this movie didn't have a backstory, there wouldn't be much else going on. The backstory being that TJ and Axel, two of the miners of the town, were best friends, and TJ was dating a girl called Sarah until he felt the need to leave town. It's not explained why in the movie. Whatever reason TJ had for leaving town didn't work out for him, and so he came back, only to find that Sarah is now dating Axel. Well, obviously this causes friction between TJ and Axel, and they no longer get on anymore. If anything, this just kind of adds a little bit of drama to the movie, because like I said, besides the main story, not a lot really happens within the movie. This tiny added backstory just creates a little more tension between the characters, if anything else. But you know what, I appreciate it. It just kind of expands the film a little more and makes it a little more interesting. Like I mentioned earlier in the synopsis, more warnings start coming ahead from Harry Warden that if they attend this dance that people are going to die. So the townsfolk decide to cancel the dance. The youngsters of the town, which happens to be the miners in this movie, are very upset at this decision, so they decide to hold their own party. And wouldn't you believe it, they only hold it in the mine. I mean, of course they would. It's a horror film. I will say though that a mine is quite an original setting, and it really does work for a horror film because it's very dark, it's dingy, it's out of the way, it's claustrophobic, so it's perfect for a film like this. And yet it doesn't feel perfectly executed. I can't really explain why. There's just something about this film that lacks just a little bit of quality. And I hate to say that because this film has got very mixed reviews. Some people just can't stand this film, other people really love it. It got poor reception when it came out, but it's developed a cult following since, and I do kind of steer towards the cult followers when it comes to appreciating this film. The movie itself didn't use a studio for the mines either, they were shot in real mines. The Sydney mines of Nova Scotia, apparently. Did I pronounce that right? I don't know. So as you can imagine, this film just becomes a very generic kind of slasher film where the character has his own choice of weapon. In this case it's a pickaxe, although he doesn't use it for every killing. But then, you know, Michael Myers doesn't always use his kitchen knife. It's just something that he uses as intimidation, and it seems to be his choice of weapon. I mean, it makes sense, after all, he is a miner. This film has a fairly decent death count in it, so if you like a film with a good death count and some gory effects or whatever, then this film definitely ticks a lot of boxes. The music in this film is there. It's nothing special, but then it doesn't need to be. It's subtle, but it works, so no complaints as far as I'm concerned. It's just nothing to rave about, that's all. And supposedly there was a sequel mentioned in 2001, but because of the poor reception of the original film, it never came to be. Let's talk about the pros and the cons of this movie. The biggest pro for me, I would say, would be the characters. I find them fairly interesting and quite entertaining. Granted, a lot of the acting is a little bit goofy at times, but the characters have got a lot of camaraderie between them. You definitely get the feeling that they all work together and they've got this kind of family atmosphere amongst them, and they play it off quite well. Like many horror movies, this film has got its own element of humour, but it doesn't overdo it. It doesn't make you feel like you're watching a comedy, but the humour is actually quite funny when it comes in. The movie has plenty of brutal deaths if that's what you're into when you're watching horror. And overall, it has good entertainment value. It certainly keeps your attention. The biggest cons for me are the fact that this film doesn't really live up to its potential. You kind of feel that this film should be bigger than it actually is, but the fact that it's got a cult following is kind of cool anyway. The other con is the fact that this film is fairly unoriginal. There were lots of slasher films around the time that this came out, and this was just another one to add to the pile. It's unoriginal and fairly uninspiring, but it doesn't mean it isn't worth watching. So this is the part of the review where I give a rating out of 10, and I don't really want to upset any of the fans of this film. I know this has a huge cult following and I do feel like I'm on board with you, but overall I feel like the film only deserves a 6 out of 10. I don't want to keep repeating the word unoriginal, but it is a fact, and at the end of the day, this film is just not for everyone. I still highly recommend it, but I know for a fact that a lot of people are going to turn their noses up at it. Which is the same reason why it didn't get its sequel in 2001. Listen folks, just because I've given this a low rating doesn't mean that I don't enjoy this film or recommend it, but in comparison to other films that were out at the time, or just in general, you have to admit it's a tad underwhelming. But listen, that's only my opinion, you don't have to share it, okay? In fact, if you have an opinion, let me know in the comment section. Well, if you have nothing better to do on Valentine's Day, then maybe give this film a watch. What do you guys think? Have you seen this film? What are your thoughts on it? Are you disappointed that I only gave it 6 out of 10 despite the fact that I actually enjoy the film? Let me know in the comments section. Are there any other Valentine's Day themed horror films out there? That's the only thing that I would give for originality of this, is it's not based at Christmas or Halloween. I don't know many horror films that are based on Valentine's Day. If there are any others, let me know in the comments section. Do you agree with everything I've said in this review, or do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear from you folks, and until next time. I don't know who they are, but if you don't subscribe, they will get you. And please be sure to hit the notification bell, click the like button, leave a comment, share this with your friends, and I will see you next time. Thanks very much folks, take care, bye bye.